then address those. I'll address those questions to Wilbert. Please use the chat button if you have any technical difficulties with audio or video quality, and the technical expert will help you to resolve those. So let me take this opportunity to first welcome Wilbert to this session. So Wilbert has had quite a distinguished career in the Netherlands. He started off in the 90s in aviation at LVNL, which is the ANSP at the Netherlands. And he's had a number of roles in systems engineering, starting from expert, moving into team management and managerial roles. And then in 2010, he became the airspace management and development expert and a lead for LVNL. In that role, he had to work with the Ministry of Defense as well as the regulatory bodies, developing the Dutch airspace vision, which was then published in 2012. And in 2017, he was then asked to join the Dutch airspace redesign program. And it's at that stage that Wilbert got the opportunity for the overall strategy and airspace vision that he had developed with his colleagues in 2012 to then translate that into actual infrastructure and start implementing it as such. Since 2021, he has been involved in the unmanned aviation program, and that's running at the Dutch Ministry. Next to being the deputy program manager, he's also responsible for implementing U-space in the Netherlands, and it is in this role of Wilbert that we want to discuss with him. Well, first of all, learn from him how Netherlands is paving the way towards airspace integration, and in here, the Common Information System, CIS, is playing a key role. We want to learn from Wilbert how Netherlands is establishing this CIS. Maybe even talk about not just the technical and operational, but also non-technical areas such as funding, any legal implications, i.e. bringing new laws into it, public perception, challenges from existing manned aviation, as well as cooperation and collaboration with other partners throughout. So lots to talk about, so let's not waste time. Wilbert, may I welcome you and ask you to perhaps go through your presentation first, and then we'll start taking questions and have an interactive. And to all the ladies and gentlemen joining our webinar, I'd encourage you to please ask as many questions as you can. We want to make it as interactive as possible. So over to you, Wilbert.
Thank you very much, Monish, for your introduction, and welcome to all viewers of this webinar. First of all, also a big thank you to the Amsterdam Drone Week team that has provided the opportunity to be in this webinar and to share our views on the road towards airspace integration in future airspace with unmanned aviation and manned aviation together, because that's in the end where we are working for. I've prepared a presentation which I will try to share on the screen, and I will then talk you through in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I hope. The title of my presentation is the Common Information Service Paving the Way Towards Airspace Integration, with a question mark. And that's on purpose, of course, because we're not final on all conclusions, but we are seeing a road ahead that looks to the conclusion, that works to the conclusion that the Common Information Service might be given that responsibility. So I will start off with some introductory slides to also take back on my presentation, which I provided during the last Amsterdam Drone Week, especially during the last stakeholder meeting of Eurocontrol on U-space. So some pictures might be familiar for you. We have this beautiful picture of the drone ecosystem, where we all see that all kinds of applications with drones, unmanned aviation, aircraft are possible. And this ecosystem is rather big because it's not only, as we are used to in traditional aviation, somewhere higher in the sky and only in the neighborhood of airfields and airports where aircraft are close to the environment, but in our drone ecosystem, they might be everywhere. So that's the extra challenge, not only talking about the aviation certification and the safety, but also talking about privacy, about the environmental impact low to the ground that this new infrastructure might bring. And in this drone ecosystem, there is a big future ahead. If we all look into our glass bowls, we see in future large-scale drone operations, urban air mobility. We see U-space as a digital traffic management system organizing the traffic in the designated airspaces. We see high social and economic value to be created with all those new applications, and also solving problems that are now in the infrastructure on the ground that can be solved by going just a small layer in the air. And there are, of course, multiple economic domains that have embraced drones in their businesses, naming some: agriculture, the care, transport, engineering, infrastructure management, and so on, and so on. So with that future ahead, there are, of course, some challenges in the evolution of the ecosystem, because the ecosystem is not there from one day on another. What we see in the Netherlands and what we get from our stakeholders in the Netherlands is that there's an increasing need for solutions adding social value with the help of drone operations. We already get requests to set up medical transport networks because of the fact that in terms of gaining efficiency in the medical care business, the road transports are not that efficient and are even sometimes a big risk for some types of transport in the medical businesses. We see demands for incident management on road, rail, waterways, fire brigades that can use applications with drones that are really gaining them in their responsibility. So more and more we see needs for a longer range of BVLOS operations, and meaning that we are not talking about the atypical airspace BVLOS, because that's already possible, but just the other one in the already existing airspaces. And the common approach, it's all starting over sparsely populated areas, because that's where the air risks and the ground risks are still manageable with the current frameworks that we are working with. But, however, there's not yet so intensive airspace use with unmanned traffic that U-space is really needed. As I mentioned already at the Amsterdam Drone Week, you don't put a traffic light on the road if there's no traffic. So how do you cope then with all these developments? And there are many manned general aviation exemptions in the CERA regulation, and especially on the fact that they are allowed to fly below the minimum altitude of 500 feet. So this means that this ecosystem already is confronted with other types of traffic in their airspace, which we have to take care of. So how can we fit this all in classic uncontrolled and controlled airspace? That's the question we are asking ourselves in the Netherlands. Well, we have this nice vision in the Netherlands that step-by-step U-space will be a system to be applied that allows unmanned aviation with added social value to be safe, efficiently, and manageable part of the national airspace infrastructure. And from this vision, we are working towards the road, the pathway. We are developing the pathway in how we could implement then U-space. And I already mentioned also at the Amsterdam Drone Week that our approach is that we have to build a national embedding framework, taking care of the governance and finance, the airspace change processes, of course, to implement U-space, to be able to implement U-space, the assignment of the competent authority, and decisions on the Common Information Service and its provision. And what we need because we are just at step 1 of the development of U-space with the current version of the regulation. It needs to be flexible, adaptive, structured, exchangeable, and harmonizable, because there will be evolutions, next implementation steps in U-space with new services where U-space service providers, but also the common information service, needs to be adapted. Thinking of all this, there are some observations and issues that I want to share, which are part of our thinking process on how common information service could play a role. One of the things is that the current SORA methodology doesn't take, in our view, enough care of multiple drone operations in each other's vicinity, in regular airspace. The air risk part is not covering enough to make sure that the operation can be operated safely. And of course, there are all kinds of methods currently in the SORA, but everybody is also gaining experience with it. And there are, from our competent authority side, some real questions that need to be answered there. There are multiple exemptions, as I already said, on SERA on the minimum flight altitudes. Naming the sailplane or the delta sailplane, the paramotors, but also police, HAMS, military, media, are allowed in one way or another to fly lower than the 500 feet over open areas. The Netherlands specifically has a very densely organized and used airspace with a major airport and some other airports in there, with a big general aviation community, both on the recreational part, but also on the professional side, means that we have a rather densely used airspace compared to, for example, Germany or France, of course, because the space they have is a lot bigger. One of the other things that we consider is, okay, but we have a lot of test centers for the development of applications with drones, but also the development of drones itself for the TRL levels 4 to 7. But once, especially in business-to-business solutions for drones, like the medical world, if you go beyond that TRL level 7, there are some complexities coming in, because then you need airspace to make sure that you can try the new business-to-business process as a whole. But we are not able, due to the small airspace and the dense airspace that we have, to organize airspace segregation for large-scale BVLOS operations on every request. Of course, there are possibilities, but there's no, it's not that smart, in our view, to accept all kinds of airspace segregations, specifically temporarily for these type of tests. So that brings us already the question, but can we do it without segregation? What we also take into consideration is that situational awareness of all airspace users is paramount to safety, of course. Once you can assure that part, you can take down a bit of the air risk and enable options to support these BVLOS requirements. And one other observation is that there is already a uniform level of information provision required already under the 947 regulation for the drone operations, which mentions already drone AIM, because of the fact, of course, that geo zones needs to be published and also digitally available to the drone operators to make sure that they can use geo awareness and even geo fencing if they want. Well, if you then consider all these elements and you take this picture in your mind, where I try to visualize a bit what airspace integration, manned and unmanned, all kinds of traffic could bring, then we are somewhere in this arrow on the now, where you see where it's of course already for a long time possible to fly VLOS operations with drones. And in a way, already BVLOS operations in atypical airspace are not really a problem. However, if you really want to go to the BVLOS operation in regular airspace, that's where, in the Netherlands at least, it becomes a bit more difficult to enable that. What we also see is that, and that's what I try to visualize here, that if traffic density increases, you need more measures to ensure safety and to manage traffic. In the end, of course, U-space will come in from the safety part as a driver for this traffic density. And on the top side, the more traffic you need to accommodate, the higher the level of integration in the airspace should become. And of course, the first step in U-space is still one of having a U-space airspace, flying a drone in there, controlled under the USSP. And if there's a manned aircraft, then of course, the dynamic airspace reconfiguration comes in, and still you have a kind of segregation, but the end situation of U-space will be, of course, that manned and unmanned will fly together in that same airspace, and there's not that bold measures are not required anymore, and you can organize it in a much more smarter way. But that needs still a lot of development. The level of information exchange increases, of course, with the different type of operations that you need to combine. If you only fly VLOS with your drone in a park, then you only have to know, of course, if you are allowed to fly there and to observe the area where you are flying, and well, that's already enough. But making BVLOS operations possible, and in the end, U-space operations, there's more information needed and integrated into the system. And of course, the traffic mix on the right side is also providing a view on what is the decision criteria to that you need to apply to make sure that you have the correct safety measures in a operation for BVLOS or in U-space, or not an or, but and to make sure that every requirement, also in terms of the public opinion and the environmental part, is covered. So all these elements bring us to some considerations for defining the CIS function, where we are seeking in the Netherlands for a path towards this CIS function that embraces all the airspace users, that enables airspace users to operate safely, that will support the BVLOS needs to operate without segregation of airspace, and that provides stepping stones towards the U-space implementation. I recall the slide where we say we go step by step towards the U-space integration in the Netherlands. We foresee that the Common Information Service might be, also outside U-space airspace, might be a great platform to enable this stepped approach. And that also supports gradual and incremental development of the Common Information Service platform itself. Why? Well, it's something new. It's something that is rather essential in terms of the innovation and the digitalization that we need to create and to support in the unmanned aviation domain, and also in support towards the manned aviation. So a good and decent approach there is really important in our view. So our view on the Common Information Service in the Netherlands is then that this Common Information Service should take care of a uniform digital information provision, which in scope of the U-space regulation 664 provide all the services that are required to support U-space airspace operations, but also outside U-space airspace should support UAS operators in their needs for BVLOS operations. And one of the arguments there as well, which I didn't mention earlier, is that this airspace outside U-space airspace could, in some time ahead, also become U-space airspace. So you also collect a lot of data about how this works in this environment, what is already happening in the airspaces, not being U-space airspace yet, which helps you also in your decision-making processes and the development of your policy framework. Common Information Service, providing information outside U-space, could, and of course we are not that far that we know already what type of services could be in there, but could bring you information on the geozone data, which should be AD 269 compliant, of course, but also static airspace data and actual airspace data. Might even collect data from the airspace management processes that we are used to in the manned aviation, the airspace use plan and the updated use plan, but also the pre-tactical schedules for the airspace use, specifically also military airspaces low to the ground, but also traffic information. Because of this uniform situational awareness, that is really essential and key to make sure that safety can be assured also in an environment where BVLOS operations are taking place in regular airspace. And this traffic information is, of course, an interesting one, because how will you then gather all this data? And that's one of the challenges that we see there as well, because the magic word of e-conspicuity comes in there, of course. So these are our views on how to go there. And the role that we foresee for Common Information Service in that perspective is that it will provide a platform to support the safe operations of all relevant airspace users, I would add to that, but also support data-driven policy development, because you gather information already in pieces of airspace where it's not already mandatory U-space airspace, but you really learn in what is happening there and what might be needed in that situation if you want to create in the end U-space airspace. And it provides already data for the airspace risk assessment that you might need to set up. It also has the role to enable BVLOS network solutions, specifically with added social value, because that's the starting point for our Dutch government to say, we start with the real social value that is being added with drone operations, because that's also important for the community as a whole. The UAS service development can be supported with such a role as Common Information Service, also outside airspace U-space airspace. And it helps with the criteria development for U-space implementations. Currently, we have a U-space regulation, but we're not everything is that clear that we already know, okay, with this traffic mix or with this amount of traffic, we need U-space airspace or not. From a privacy or a security perspective, we're not have the clear indicators yet. So it could also help in gathering the data for these developments as well. And of course, we can support the processes to try to reach social embracement. I love the word embracement here, because it's not about acceptance. It's really about embracement. If we can create a community with an ecosystem where the people living in the areas are saying, oh, we want this solution with a drone because it helps us, that's far more better than to try to convince people that this is needed, where they still have the doubts or are not convinced yet. And of course, there will always be people that have thoughts about some type of things, but embracement is a beautiful one. And with a Common Information Service that is providing data to everybody in the area, also outside U-space airspace, you also have a platform to share this information with everyone who is interested. So this is our view on the role of Common Information Service, and in that way will be a platform that supports the evolution of the ecosystem as well. And in that direction also paving the way, in our view, towards the airspace integration. So this is my story, which I wanted to share with you, and I already want to thank you for your attention and, well, probably a lot of questions which are there that need to be answered. Of course, we don't have all the answers ourselves yet, but we're working on it.
Well, thank you very much for setting the scene and I would say getting people going, because the questions really are coming in thick and fast. I'll be honest with you, and very good one as well. So thank you for sharing the approach for U-space implementation in Netherlands. I particularly like, and there are some questions related to the extended role of CIS, which isn't something that we have heard from many other places, but very interesting one. And its link, as you highlighted, to gathering data from both operations in control, manned and unmanned aviation, controlled and segregated airspace, which hopefully will then shed some light on how to create an all-integrated airspace in future, which is where it appears you guys are heading. So before we get into the the details of the questions, there are some let's say administrative questions that people have asked. So let me get them out of the way. I understand the organizers, the Amsterdam Drone Week organizers, will make the video recording and the presentation available, and we'll send out to those who have expressed their interest. So should you wish to have that, please drop a line to the organizers and they will respond back to you. So that will happen maybe 1 or 2 days after the end of this webinar today. So let's kick it off. Let's start with a high-level question. Wilbert, what I like in the ideas that you guys are thinking in a very top-down manner is that you start from society, and you emphasized on the use of the phrase social embracement, which is quite nice. It's not, you said it's not social acceptance, but embracement, which indeed is the way that if people feel that there is a need for drones and that the drones can help their lifestyle, they will embrace it. If they embrace it, that means there's a demand for those operations. If there's demand for those operations, then the industry partners will join in to create solutions for them. And those industry solutions could be, let's say, related to medical delivery of equipment and important essential items. It could be related to first responders, perhaps on the road or elsewhere. It could also be related to providing essential services in sparsely populated areas in the country, and so on and so forth. I think it's fair to say, and your presentation highlighted that you see, particularly in Netherlands, that the demand might grow first from areas related to delivering essential services and also in sparsely populated areas, and slowly but surely they grow. Now, in terms of integrated airspace in future, one of your slides, I think opening slides, highlighted that in future we will have an airspace with mixed traffic, all airspace users sharing the airspace equally or equitably, let's say. Today, we are no doubt a long way away from it, but that's the ultimate vision. How do you see? You may or may not have a mature roadmap for it, but how do you see we as a community move from today to getting to that stage where we have that integrated airspace? And are there any key milestones in your mind, whether it's from Dutch perspective or generic drone UAS unmanned aviation perspective, that I think we will, and you think that we will cross? Let's start from there.
Well, that's of course a very interesting question, and that's one that is also buzzing in our minds. But how do we get in the end situation in the end where manned and unmanned traffic in all types of operations can coexist in the same airspace? And of course, there will always be scenarios where you need to segregate something or to make sure that a specific operation is taken care of in a specific airspace. But one of the most important things, at least in my mind, is that the concept of operating in airspace has been for years, or even started with, look out the window and see what is happening. See and avoid is the most elementary form of safety insurance in the air. That's where it all started. Of course, later on, all kinds of equipment requirements came in, radar came, and we are able to, with all kinds of navigation performance and surveillance performance and communication performance requirements set and implemented, we are able to fly on instrument flight rules through the air, assuring safety by separating aircraft through radar and all kinds of surveillance technologies, which is it's been a great evolution, a slow evolution compared to what we now see in the tempo of the unmanned aviation, but not strange that it went that way, because the demand was not that big that there was a revolution required. But coming up with also unmanned aviation in the airspace, there's no see and avoid. And the traditional instrument flight rules are not applicable to the drones at least below 100 kilos because of the heaviness of the equipment that is a requirement to fly IFR. So the digital transition there will be a key element to make sure that you can integrate in future. And I think that's the most important one. But the most difficult one, I think, will be, and that will be really key, to make sure that all the existing aviation the existing airspace users are also able to fly in a more digital environment. As I mentioned, the general aviation already, especially the recreational part, the sports part, they are flying still on see and avoid. And they are able to remain well clear with this mechanism, with this concept, in almost all situations. And to make them work in a digital environment is a very interesting challenge. But that's, I think, one of the most key elements to make the transition towards this digital infrastructure, but most importantly, to make sure that all airspace users can comply in this new world to the rules that we need to engage there.
Thank you. You no doubt it's you've highlighted some high level milestones, and really the mention of general aviation brings a new plethora of questions again from our visitors and our attendees, and one of those really is related to your concept of extended CIS, because in the extended CIS, you would be looking at going beyond the U-space airspace, and it will have an impact on general aviation, particularly as you mentioned in your presentation, that there would be a need for e-conspicuity requirements to be met for both manned and unmanned vehicles flying in that one. How do you think the general aviation will react to that? Because whilst on one hand it will provide safety of operations, no doubt, it will undoubtedly increase the cost for them. Do you have any ideas about that? You may have had consultations with the GA community.
Yeah, I very well understand that worry of general aviation, because if you want to extend the CIS towards the generic airspace, and of course it starts with low altitudes, general aviation expressed these worries in one of the consultations that we had last winter, where we really had a specific session on, okay, but if we want to bring unmanned and manned aviation together, what do we need there? And of course, e-conspicuity is the magic word, hard to pronounce if for a lot of people, but still a magic word. And surprisingly, a lot of the people in general aviation that were on this meeting said, well, we don't have a problem with sharing our position data or whatever that is needed in such an environment via a digital way. But indeed, their worry is what will be the cost, because they already had to invest in their aircraft due to the Mode S requirements in Europe, and to have some mandatory use of them in airspace. And these solutions were not cheap for a lot of people. And of course, if you can fly a private aircraft or rent one, you of course have some money to fly an aircraft and to make an investment. But still, if you do an investment, and that's for everybody, you do it to use it frequently and to have a thorough case closing the financial investment there. So e-conspicuity is a very interesting one, if it also could be a low-cost one, because then you really can open up the world for everybody to share their information that is required. And I really believe that with the upcoming ADS Lite specifications, there is already one for the SRD 860 frequency band, but more still to come. I expect that will really open up possibilities to start with sharing this data outside U-space airspace as well. And maybe to add there, it might even be needed to support that in the beginning, to make sure that everybody is able to equip with an ADS Lite standard equipment to set up to give a boost to this development and to the implementation.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly Bernardo highlighted this question and asked about it. So thanks for the question, Bernardo. There are a number of other questions. I'm going to roll them all together. They're all related to the funding aspect, actually. There's a attendee listening to our conversations that wants to understand how it's going to be funded by users. Tomer Serok asks, in Netherlands, who will own the CIS? Another anonymous person wants to know how would the CIS be connected to the general public, and would the data be of public access, and also whether there is any clarity already on who could possibly be the CIS provider in Netherlands. So let's take one by one. So let's take the funding aspect first. What's the current thinking in Netherlands as to, because initially when CIS is established, it will be difficult for that function to raise sufficient revenue to pay for its operational day-to-day operations. What's the thinking in Netherlands? How is that going to be funded, at least in the beginning, and perhaps in the medium term?
Yeah, of course, a logical question, because nothing is going to happen if there's no money. And that's the one that we also are addressing ourselves. Last year we already did some study on how with having no ecosystem and having to build one, what would be the road when you look to governance and finance. And we already in the Netherlands said, well, we have to do it together with the partners in the unmanned and manned aviation sector, because we all have to develop knowledge and implementations to learn from it and to start up this ecosystem. And from that participation part, we also need to stay in control for a part as a government as well, because we are responsible for the infrastructure, for the fit with also the other infrastructures on the ground, because you can easily say, okay, in the air we can fly here, but if you do it in a populated area, you immediately have another problem if you don't take care of that. So that's where, as a government, we also want to be in a kind of control. So this combination is a very essential one in setting up the governance and developing the unmanned aviation as a ecosystem in total. And in that view, if there's no market yet, but you really want to start building the ecosystem, okay, of course, you might look into, are there private investors that are able to invest money? And of course, if people in the business are able to invest and to make sure that they can provide with this investment already a start of some services or some developments, that's very, very nice. We have to build that together. But still, if you come to the major setups that are needed, we foresee that we will have a single common information service provider in the Netherlands. And this will also mean if you decide for this extended service, which we are now developing the decision making for, but that's the way we are really thinking forward. Then if you also take the responsibility to say, hey, we are, as a government, we also are responsible to ensure safety as one of the basic elements that is needed, then it might also be needed that as a government you start with the investment to enable this development and to make sure that safety can be accommodated in a good way. And once this market is starting to evolve and starting to grow, and there's a really takeaway also in economic value, then you could slowly switch towards a model where the market is starting to pay for the service that they get. So in the beginning, most probably, from a government perspective, we have to make a kind of setup cost. And later on, this might slowly change into partially and in the end, fully cost recovery by the users of the airspace.
No, that's something I'm hearing from other member states as well, but certainly discussions with Spain, Switzerland, Sweden are some of the examples that we're hearing where they're saying similar things, that initially to get the market going, the public sector, the government will support them, and depending on the needs of that market, whether it's what the amount is and for how long. I've heard at least that in some states they're looking at up to 3 years to fund it, and within that time period, the government would expect a business case to have been developed based on the knowledge that is gathered, and that business case hopefully will then take, as you said, in a step-by-step manner, perhaps from a fully government to a partially government funded, and then hopefully eventually for it to pay for itself. And eventually, I suppose the cost of the CIS function eventually will have to be transferred to the clients, the customer. That's how most of the other markets have developed, such as telecoms, internet, and so on. And it's likely that this might move in the similar sort of direction as such. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got about 120 participants, and you're asking all kinds of very interesting questions. I'm going to move on to some other questions related to, again, let's stick with the organizational aspect of CIS. In the Netherlands, Wilbert, is it already clear, or are discussions still ongoing as to who the CIS provider might actually be? I know that in some of the other member states, we're hearing it could possibly be a part of the ANSP that could provide. But what's the thinking in the Netherlands, please?
Yeah, well, that's a part of an ongoing discussion and evaluation currently within our team. We already more or less said the Common Information Service will be a single one in the Netherlands for the whole of the Netherlands airspace. And what we already saw, based on not only the current requirements for U-space in the development of our national Common Information Service architecture, but that with the extension of service and the future developments, there are all types of information that need to be exchanged and serviced by this Common Information Service, which are also on the level of information security, that we say, okay, this level of information security that is required is for some of the partners in this information domain, specifically military and national security, so important that we foresee that the Common Information Service will be a public service. So we do not expect, on short terms at least, that a Common Information Service provider will be a commercial company. And this outlines a bit the direction also in looking for who will then be the service provider, where we, of course, also look to the ANSP in the Netherlands, LVNL, but also look to other organizations that work in mobility and with data.
Right.
Because mobility and urban air mobility, but drones in general, and the management of that traffic in future is also a way of mobility traffic management. And we are in aviation very used to our own domain, but it's very good and very interesting to learn also from other domains of mobility to see what you can do there. So we are currently assessing multiple scenarios on who could be or what is the best choice with the information that you have now to say this organization should be the common information service provider. But we are not have not decided yet.
But very interesting dimension. So you're really looking at intermodal, multimodal aspect of mobility here. So it might well even be that you are considering not just the aviation partners, but also non-aviation, but still in mobility sector, in transportation sector, as likely candidates who could possibly become the CIS itself, which is something similar to what Mesut Yilmaz from Turkey was asking a question, and that was to do with the relationship between your government support, support from regulation, and the establishment of CIS. So thanks for that question, Mesut. Jean-Pierre Demout from Belgium, Sky Drones, has asked a question which is partially answered by you, but you may want to just elaborate on that. And he says, knowing that you correctly stated that one, the Dutch airspace is so dense and complex, and two, that there's so much benefit in using the CIS concept also outside the U-space airspace, why not declare the U-space airspace over the entire Dutch territory up to 500 feet?
Yeah, that's a question that
it's a very good question. Very good question. Yeah.
Very good question. That's one that I had already multiple times, and there's something to say for the idea to declare all airspace U-space airspace. But once we do that in the framework of the EU of the regulations that we have, then we need to have commercial U-space service providers that are certified. You have to have fully developed services available within this U-space airspace, and it for a lot of reasons brings also a lot of burdens towards the airspace users because of the fact that they need then to bring in they need to have a contract with a U-space service provider if they operate. They have to file their plans next to all the other things that they already have to do, whilst there's not a real reason for the operation to do so. So it brings not of course, from a conceptual perspective, it could bring all the benefits you expect with U-space, but that's the case when there's a mature U-space implementation available.
And perhaps you're right, and perhaps also building this could be the vision for future, couldn't it? Because this could mean this is. If we went that way, it would be effectively creating a unified airspace for all airspace users, where airspace is shared equitably by everyone. That is the vision that I think for in future that we want to get to. But you're right to say that there's going to be step-by-step integration of all this as we get to that stage.
And I really believe that if with the direction we are thinking now, with the Common Information Service being broader available than only U-space airspace, we really build a stepping stone that provides us knowledge, information, gives us the chance to learn on all different scenarios in that airspace to assure the next step to be a good one towards a first U-space implementation or towards the development of new flight rules, which is also part of the drone European drone strategy, because I think that's really needed. Something else than IFR and VFR, and also a clarification on the interpretation of the U-space regulation and the current drone operations regulations compared to the basic regulation, because there are still also all kinds of small gaps discussions there as well that needs to be solved to make sure that you create a system, a holistic system that really works as a system in total.
Sure, thank you. So, a slightly different question from a Dutch industry provider from Port of Rotterdam, and could you elaborate if any? I'm sure they have played a role. The Port of Rotterdam has played a role in the development of this, the whole, well, certainly ongoing discussions on the CIS, and I know for sure as there was public announcements that Port of Rotterdam are now quite ready and mature in PV loss operations and so on. So what role has the Port of Rotterdam played in consultations with you?
A rather big one, of course, because their initiative to set up a U-space prototype is, of course, one that I think everybody understands you will embrace. They really build up some basic experience with starting to implement the systems, the cooperation with all the airspace users. They know the integration of the UES operators with the airspace management system, so to speak. And we last year set up a session, multiple sessions, even with the Port of Rotterdam, to also to derive research or development questions that needs to be answered from a operational perspective, from a port management perspective, but also from a airspace integration perspective and an airspace regulation perspective. And we are currently starting the next phase with them to set up a plan to address all these questions in this prototype development together with the National Airspace Center, NLR, to make to gather data, to gather information, and to try to get answers on those questions. So Port of Rotterdam is a very interesting partner in the development, not only for us as a government, but I think for everybody that is looking into the U-space development as a whole. Yeah.
Indeed, no, thank you, and really, we look forward to more and more news from the Port of Rotterdam. That I think it's going to be something that we should all look forward to. Jaap Hattenboer from UMCG Ambulance Services is sort of highlighted a little bit about your question that you were answering previously that I asked, and he says that one of the candidates, of course, could possibly for a CIS could possibly be even the National Road Traffic organization, and they have a data portal that is available for people to go and have a look at it, just to get an idea for what they can do. There's an interesting question going back to the discussion on GA and the cost of e-conspicuity on GA that Bernardo has asked. Could the cost and therefore the responsibility of situational awareness be shifted to larger players? For example, asking airlines to implement active measures like radar, computer vision, etc., to monitor its surroundings and share this information, to contrast with the lower and more affordable technical private pilots that they can afford. It's interesting. It's basically saying that could the larger larger airspace users with let's say a bigger profit-making model pick up the tab for smaller GA level organizations and users who might struggle to pay for the additional equipment they need to have. It's a thought. It's a thought. I don't know if in consultations, if you guys have thought about it or discussed it.
No, it's for me a new direction of thinking. I haven't, and I didn't. The idea hasn't been reached to me yet. So I think something to think about.
Yeah.
Also knowing a bit how the aviation business, especially the big commercial aviation, is running now, it might be an interesting option.
Because you know, if you think about it, Wilbert, I mean, this is the model of LinkedIn. for example, and also the Googles and the others, which is that they would charge the institutional and organizational customers and users to pay for the largest part of that of the service they provide. And for small scale users, that would basically fund the platform that they can use. So it's something that has been used in the industry, no doubt. So thanks very much for that comment, Bernardo. We're getting very close to that time where we're going to have to wrap up, and there's tons of questions still coming in. So you really have hit the nerve there, Wilbert. I think it would be appropriate maybe just take one last question, and then I'll wrap up. An attendee with a acronym FJA has highlighted, what are the next concrete steps in this process that's ongoing right now, Wilbert? What can we expect to see, I don't know, say before the end of the year, let's say?
Well, what we are currently in is, as I already mentioned, we are assessing the different scenarios on who should be the common information service provider. Mm-hmm. We, of course, need to prepare all the decision-making on the directions that we foresee for the common information service. In the end, also in government, we have to go up to probably our minister as well to make sure that that the decisions that we want to make are covered, but also are embraced by the politicians. And that's currently a bit uncertain because, as you know, our government has stepped down just before summer, so we are really waiting for the Parliament to decide on which subjects and which decisions are allowed to be taken until the next government is in place after the elections that will be there in November.
Sure.
But we are preparing all those decision-making, and we have to elaborate on some of the elements, of course, take advice from our senior management in our organization as well, consult with different partners on some of the sub-elements there. But I really hope, and that's at least my goal, to have a formal decision on the context of the Common Information Service and who will be the Common Information Service provider by the end of this year.
Excellent. Oh, that's wonderful to look forward to. Excellent. Thank you very much, Wilbert. I'd like to really thank you for sharing so openly and transparently your views and the views of the Dutch government and the ongoing work. I'd like to thank all the attendees for joining us in this webinar, and also equally those who have asked many questions. And my apologies, we ran out of time. We can't respond to all your questions. I hope we have covered majority of those. And I think the one takeaway that I'm taking away from this is that this is a fantastic opportunity for all member states really to think out of the box and to look at the long-term future as the Netherlands is looking at and therefore your concept of extending the scope of CIS beyond U-space, airspace is a rather interesting one. It may not be for everyone, but still it's an interesting one. Your insistence on social embracement I really like, because I think at the end of the day we need to be clear what we are doing and who we are doing it for. And if the people we're doing it for are not bought in, then the whole concept of why we're doing all this becomes a bit redundant. So I really like that part of it. I really like the fact that you are consulting actively with your stakeholders throughout the country, and also looking at a multimodal scope rather than just one small aviation scope. So thanks very much. These are some of the takeaways I've taken away. I wish you all a very pleasant rest of the day, and the organizers will send you the video recording as well as the presentation. So if you wish to receive those, please express your interest. Thank you very much, and look forward to talking to you more in future. Bye for now.